Okay, that brings us to comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda. Yes, please. Can you tell us who you are? Sure. Actually, there's an extra microphone there if you want to speak so that you can be heard. That would be great. Thank you.
Hello to everyone. Good evening again.
Good evening.
Last year I have seen you. So I just wanted to explain my situation. I'll try to be as concise as I can. Right now, as the last year, they offered me a maritime course to go to Spain again. As I remember, last year it has been denied by all of you. But this year, I just wanted to kind of explain my circumstances. They have changed gradually since last year. Last year, I had the social housing. I've been living at Spectrum Youth and Services. This year, unfortunately, starting 31st of July, they have closed it. I mean, they lost federal funding. So since that and until now, I lost completely any type of housing, and I unsuccessfully tried to contact all different type of social services. I even been camping outside on the back of the South Burlington High School, right in the backwoods, when they have discovered me. And what they did is they called social services. They tried to help me in any way, but eventually they said there's no ideas at this point, right? Why I'm telling, I just wanted to connect that kind of, I don't want to be pitiful or, try to, say that, it's a bad situation, but what I can do, right? I'm still studying and struggling and all that. But the connection between my housing situation and the course is that if I would have been allowed to join that course for 1 month, it's about 3 weeks in total. I mean, 4 weeks, but because Thanksgiving falls into the dates, it's actually 3 weeks in total. So I would have, as we have a saying in Spain, killed 2 hares. The first hare is obviously, as last year I dreamt about, I would have got specialty, right? Maritime specialty, which I could have used if I would never get admitted in college, or something had happened. And the second, I know that in the beginning, towards the middle of November, the warming shelters will open, and I most likely will also get a place somewhere in the social housing by then. And I'm pretty confident that in the next 2-3 weeks, I wouldn't get anything like that at this point, unfortunately. So, as I said, this could be, and I can see from my point of view, I would have been much more productive if I could have do assignments on NEO. It's like, I don't know if you're familiar, it's like the system NEO. Yeah, it's in computer, you're a student. So I'm doing, the teachers, most of them agreed. Some who didn't agree, they just said, well, if you choose that, you just have to drop the course. There's 2 challenging courses that I would have had, to sacrifice for that. But in general, again, the same thing happened like last year. I went to first to Mrs. McDonald. She has denied the request, and then Mr. Burke also denied the request because of the length of my absence, right, from the school. Obviously, I have tried to explain, and I just wanted to mention very important thing. I really like your school. No, seriously, in South Burlington High School, I'm enjoying being there. So obviously in my best interest is to stay there and not go to that course. But looking at the circumstances that I presented, my living circumstances at this point, I also spoke with my mother, and she said, well, how you leave is maybe it's a good idea to kind of, wait there until you get something here and come back. Even though it's not the best choice, because the continuity of studies in terms of academic success, I clearly understand that it's very, very important. And the second thing, just, kind of separate thing between that and the other, is that if you do deny me to do that again, if you can please, because the police officer at the school, he said that I can't camp in the back. But then I asked, whom can I ask? And he said, well, that's not even the business of the principal. It's just entire district. It's just the policy. So I'm really peaceful person. The only option I have right now is the cot shelter, which is I stayed last year. It's like it's a horror movie 5 times bigger than that. It's really not the place where I could have wanted to stay. So until the warming shelter opens, I would have preferred to stay in that backwoods if it's possible, next to the school. It's only 5 minutes away from school, and then all other places where I try to stay, I've been for the last 1 week since they told me that I can't stay anymore in the Burlington airport where I slept for about 3 weeks. They told me that I've been trying to camp in Burlington. I've been trying to camp in many different places, even at UVM campgrounds, and a very nice, by the way, grass place. All that places have jurisdiction under different police forces, and all that police forces actuated very well against my presence. So at this point, I can't even camp anywhere because they find me everywhere. I mean, in terms of like they see me, they somehow find me, and they, obviously it's like discontinuity of my. I have a really good tent, so I can, stay. But yeah, if in case you do deny, if I could please, I don't know, request to stay there until the warming shelter opens, which is about another 3 weeks, which is very peaceful and nice place, right in the backwoods next to the like running place, yeah. Running court, or I don't know how you call it, next the trails, yeah. That's where I put my trail, and I only stayed there just 2 days. Obviously, they figured it out. They found it quite quickly. I think I wasn't hiding it well enough, but yeah.
Well, first, let me say I am completely sympathetic, and I am amazed at your demeanor and your positivity given the circumstances and what is going on. This is typically something that is handled by administration, and I think you're going through the appropriate channels. I don't know if you have yet met with the superintendent, but I think that would probably be the next step, rather than having a big discussion about both sides of the issue and trying to understand. We don't even have Pat Burke or any of the other administrators in this meeting. I think it would be better, since it's a single student issue, for us to take it offline. And I'm happy to follow up with David and sort of understand where we are and see what other resources we can try to bring to bear, because I don't think, as peaceful as it is, that it's appropriate for one of our students to be camping in the backwoods near the track. So I would like to see if there's something we can do to help you with that. But with regard to your issue about wanting to take leave to go do another course, again, this is something that is just not really within the purview of the board typically. So the right thing to do, I think, is to have a meeting with David, and I'm happy to just sort of follow up with David and make sure that you're getting what you need from the district.
Sure.
But I don't think that we can really take a vote on something like that in a public meeting.
See, because last year, I don't know if I recall it well, but I think I spoke with David after speaking with Burke, and that's why I eventually came here, because there was no way to overrule the decision of Mr. Burke. Yeah.
Who's just joined us, by the way. Speak of the devil.
Yeah. So yeah, it's the second time, and I'm trying my hard.
I think the circumstances were different. I don't know all of the details, but
Right.
I think, again, appropriate, as you indicated, Bridget, that let me follow up with Mr. Burke and let me
Okay.
see where things are at, and it may be necessary that I connect back with him and perhaps Mr. Burke also joining me, so that there's
Sure.
a clear response to your request
Sure.
and an understanding of either why we say yes or why we say no.
Sure.
Mhm.
And just one little thing, the problem is, because obviously your board meeting is once, I think, a month or something like that, that tomorrow is deadline. I have to let them know what is my decision, because they're waiting right now already for 1 week. Maritime school, yeah. They are said tomorrow, or you go, you don't go. And I have to make them it really clear tomorrow around evening, so yeah.
And where are you staying tonight?
Well, right now my tent is right, like my bags for the tent and all that is right there in the entrance. I have no idea. That's why I was requesting that backwoods place. because, as I said, any other place is there's jurisprediction that police controls all that areas. I haven't found yet a place where I can peacefully camp without any problem. So.
Alex, did you have something to say?
Yeah, well, first of all, I can sympathize with you. I was homeless for a very short time when I was in high school, and my grades went down into the dumper, and so I applaud your gumption and keeping at it. I'm thinking in the back of my head that there may be some sort of way to find a host family in South Burlington that would be willing to put up an exchange student. And I don't know if you're exactly what they would call an exchange student, but it sounds very similar to something like that. So
It does, yeah.
Have you explored those channels?
Nobody actually presented me at any point that option, because I spoke with my guidance counselor, and they only told me about the COTS, but they never told me about the exchange family. Maybe, I don't know if I mentioned it. I think I did mention that to them.
Yeah.
But I think as far as I understood from them from last year, because in the beginning of the last year I had the same problem, but luckily enough, the space in different transitional housing programs was much emptier last year. Now it's all full.
Oh, really?
So, I was staying always. I never camped last year. They bought me a tent, but I never used it. So it never. They said, I think they do that exchange things, but like not involving school or something like that. I'm not sure. Like through different ways. I'm not sure what they said exactly at the guidance counselor last year, but I don't think so. They consider it as an option.
Okay.
As far as I remember, I don't know very well.
Yeah. I don't know all the options, and it's not really a board level decision, like
Sure.
like Bridget said. But I do have a hard time imagining that we can't find somebody that is willing to host a student from Spain.
Yeah, I don't know. And they never, as I said, I spoke with guidance. They know my situation really well. They never presented me any like option like that. Probably they would, because they knew that for a very long time. Yeah. Maybe.
Well, I think, this is what we would be saying to any citizen. I would think it would come in. I think utilizing the resources of our public service people, I would strongly recommend that he just reach out to the police department and say, this is a situation tonight.
Sure.
And I think we would all be saying that no matter whom. And so that would be my suggestion to you as you leave this evening, that you make that call. I don't think any of us feel good about what we just heard, that you don't have any place to stay. I guess I would probably ask you to reach out to your parents, your mom, and seek some guidance from her, like you did earlier, and find out where she can. As parents, we care about our kids, and my hope is that maybe there would be some support you can get from her too. I'm not sure, where she lives or where she is, but maybe she can.
Europe, yeah, right.
Maybe again, she can provide some support to you that way as well.
It's just when they took that tent out, out of the school grounds, the backwoods. What they did is they did reach the social services of South Burlington, and in the beginning they did told me, I think they were part of Howard Center or something like that. They did told me that they're gonna try to find me some short-term housing, but then they said call us in the evening. It really happened, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, really recently. And then when I did call them, their story completely changed. They just said, well, it's a really long-term solution, so now we can't do anything, and you just be mindless where you camp. That's what they said. That was their response. So, yeah. And they work with police department, just so you know. So that's why I was saying about the courses, because it was kind of a escapatory route for that month until the warming shelter opens, which is quite ridiculous, right? Go to Spain to escape all the situation. Because I want to make clear, I really want to go to college in the United States. That's why I'm still here. I want to live in the US. I want to stay here, get my education here fully. So.
Excuse me, if I ask, what year are you?
What year? I'm senior right now.
Senior now.
I'm senior, yeah. I'm wrapping up finally. So happy. Yeah.
Okay. So I think David.
Yeah, I'm just going to follow you out, actually, and you guys can
walk
keep
out
going.
with you. While David's doing that, I think we can, are there any other comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda?
Yeah.
Yes. Noah Everett.
Yeah. I have some follow-up questions from last week. thank you guys all for your patience with my son last week too. Appreciate that.
Great.
Thank you. So I just wanted to get some clarity around the times when decisions are made, but it's not a voted on or full decision of the board. And just if you could describe how that happens, or is that what that entails?
So, no, I don't think that we're at liberty to discuss this right now. It's my understanding that a grievance has been brought against the board. And I think these questions and these concerns will be raised in that process. So I think we are not, we had prepared quite a detailed response to last week's questions, and we're prepared to talk about it. We really feel at this point that our hands are tied in talking about that at this stage.
Sure. And then so not related to the grievance, just related to the situation with DataPath currently, and their communications to not only the board but also the district and to employees around the state. So I was just wondering if the district has had a follow-up contact with DataPath, as was originally mentioned in the memo from DataPath to everybody, but was also deleted out, if that's happened.
This is an administrative issue, and this is something that the business office would be doing. This is not something that the board would be, doing on a day-to-day basis. So my understanding is that the business office is in almost constant contact with DataPath across a variety of issues. But beyond that, I can't give you any clarity on the specifics of what has happened about that letter.
Okay, and then just the last piece is, and maybe this seems redundant, but actually I think that I'll just make sure, so DataPath has recently released that they are willing to pay direct to provider, and I just wanted to know if this body was aware of that, and the reason why I would see that as different than what you just said is because of the information before about that being a joint discussion as opposed to a just administrative discussion.
Again, I really can't talk about this anymore.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry if I...
Yeah, it's okay. Any other comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda? Okay, we will move on to announcements, and the student representative report. Well, the announcements go first, and then I believe there's another announcement after that.
Yep. So just a quick junior rep update. The application is finally sent out. I told in my little message to just send them to me, and then I assume I'll just forward those to Delina or Meg, because I didn't know where else to send them. So I just said to the students to just send them quickly to me, and I'll just forward those all to the office. And then from there, I'm sure you guys take over interviews or whatever. And then I've already also spoke to at least 2 people that are very interested. So hopefully we'll get somebody on soon, very soon. Today was the final day for the NEASC visit, and so the high school got released at 2:50, and so hopefully that whole week went well. I know I was part of a lot of things. Next week in the high school is Spirit Week, while Wednesday is, like I mentioned last week, Freshman Community Service Day, and then PACT and PSAT stuff, and then homecoming is next Saturday. Starting with the Cannon 5K run, which is happening in the morning, and then throughout the day there will be all other activities. Tomorrow morning, TIE Germany students depart, as the Spanish kids left last week. And then this Friday are the middle school and high school A starts, while the elementary schools have early dismissals. And then it's also the fall ball, which recently replaced the homecoming dance via student council last year. And then finally on the 10th, also next Wednesday, is the USCIS naturalization ceremony, which happens in the middle school, which I know is a pretty awesome event. I participated in, well, as a student watching that event when I was in the middle school. And then it's also the annual International Walk to School Day, which Chamberlain participates in every year. That's it.
Okay. Steve, I think you have an announcement to make.
Thanks, and I'd ask the chair if I could just announce that I do not intend to run again when my term is up as a school board member, and I just want to let folks know that at this point, so that if anybody else is interested in the general public, that they might consider doing so.
Thank you, and thank you for your service and all that you've contributed so far, and that we will wring out of you for the next few months before your
Yeah.
term is over.
Get it over the next 5 months, right?
Yeah, and anyone who is interested in running should certainly reach out to any of the school board members to ask questions or get further information about that. Did you have any announcements, Alex?
I do have an announcement. It is a repeat of what I announced last week, is that Thursday, November 1st, the Howard Center is putting on its speaker series, and I don't have the literature in front of me, but Thursday, November 1st at dealer.com, they have a speaker talking about vaping, and I believe the subtitle is "The Myth Behind the Smokescreen." And I think that's something that is pertinent to the school board, and I want to get back into why I'm bringing this up, because I'm starting to feel like a bit of a one-man band, and I don't think that's should be the case. When I started my career about 30 years ago, the job interview that actually landed my career on the start, in that interview, I was asked, "Do you smoke?" And I was able to say no. And I got the job. I don't know what would have happened if I said, "Yeah, sometimes," and I take off, every hour, whatever. But it had an impact on me. And I also see people in my current work taking breaks, every half hour. And I've got to think to myself, this cannot be helpful for their careers to be taking these breaks every half hour. And so as a school board, it's our job, one of our ends is career readiness, and to have our kids go on to be successful in their careers after they graduate. But I've seen these several instances, and I see them often, is that graduating from high school, you're probably going to be a little bit less successful if you're a regular smoker than if you are not. And that's why smoking is directly in, I don't know if you want to say conflict or if a hindrance to the school board accomplishing its ends. So that's why I'm bringing it up, because I've been a witness to what it does, and I've been on the fortunate side of it, not the unfortunate side of it. So that's why I'm bringing it up. I believe that it's school board business, and we should be speaking up about it. And Patrick, you made a good comment a few months ago. You said, "I'd like to strangle the person that invented vaping." That indicates to me that South Burlington High School has a pretty serious problem. Vaping is an emerging epidemic, and it's something that has not really entered the public consciousness, but it's certainly entered high schools. And it's a new form of addiction. It's more convenient than cigarettes, but it's still a problem. And I think school boards need to be taking positions on it, and I'm hoping that the legislature will raise the age to buy them from 18 to 21, because right now there are a lot of 18-year-old high school students who are able to buy them legally and hand them off to their underage friends. Let me go to get on a little more thing. I think this is something that the board should be taking the initiative on as well, even if we don't get a recommendation from the administration. It sounds to me like the administration would be in favor of the board taking a position on it, but it just hasn't been brought up. Normally, what the board does is it discusses recommendations from the administration and acts on them. This would be going in a different direction if we don't get more input from the administration. But I'm interested in more input from the administration. I'm interested in more details, Patrick, of what you have found and your experiences with it, because this is something that is very new. It probably was not around even 4 years ago or 3 years ago when our seniors were freshmen. So this is something that's not being discussed. It's not really in the public consciousness yet, but it's something that's happening very quickly, and we really need to get in front of it. So to wrap it up, I'm going to be at the November 1st speak at dealer.com, and I would encourage anybody else who's concerned about the issue to attend as well. And thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Alex. Any other announcements? Okay,
You're on announcements?
we are on announcements.
Sorry for
No,
being
we
absent.
took our time with announcements, and we had an announcement from Steve, we had Arnell's announcements, and we had an announcement from Alex. So if you have a
So a
couple.
couple quick things. We had Outstanding Teacher Day on Monday, and we recognized 2 teachers from the same ones that you heard, if those of you who were at convocation, Mike Hoffman from the middle school, and Annette Cooper, and a nice job UVM did in hosting that event. And then there's many other things. I don't know all of what was previously talked about, but today ended the NEASC visit. Again, I want to thank the board members who were able to make those meetings, but most importantly, the high school staff that, those of you who've witnessed their self-study, Patrick and the entire team, did an awesome job in providing what I think was really good information for them. In my dialogue with them, they were impressed in the thoroughness of the report and of the visit, and we'll be looking forward to their feedback summary. I know they had that a final meeting today. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it, but again, I was hearing positive things. So just wanted to say those.
Yeah, thank you for including board members in that process. I found it very exciting to be with our students and with our team who had worked so hard for so many months to prepare for that visit. And I would second, I heard the same things from the committee when I was there on Sunday, that they were impressed by how thorough we were and how we had thought about all the details. And so well done, Pat and Lissa and the whole team at the high school.
Awesome, thanks.
So if there are no other announcements, that brings us to city and school collaboration.
So the only thing going on there really has been conversations about the meeting prior to the November 6th meeting. So just we've been working to put that information together and getting out the information in the other paper on the information session for the 5th. And so that's kind of in play. There's been some communication and coordination now. You'll start seeing those things happen based on the requirement for us to post and inform. That's
Yeah.
going to be happening.
For those who haven't been following that discussion, Dave is referring to the fact that there will be ballot items both from the city and from the school district with respect to the land exchange at Rick Marcotte on the November 6th ballot. So we are required to have a public information session the night before. So we're sort of working on the details of that.
I think, there's going to be 4 articles. The articles are pretty lengthy and legal information, legal dialogue. So it's going to be important to provide some clarity to the voters around what they're going to see in what will be a yes and what will be a no on the associated individual articles. So anyway, more to follow on that.
Okay. That brings us to negotiations with South Burlington Educators Association. I should fill you in, David, just while you're out of the room. Noah did ask a couple of questions. We discussed that we really couldn't answer them right now. So I know that we had potentially talked about that being part of this agenda item. But do you want me to give a brief update, or do you want to give an update? As we had discussed at previous meetings, we had reached out to the SBEA, the teachers union, to say that we are going to negotiate for a 1-year contract, and we are now I think we have specific dates that people are available, and we're just working out the details of times for the first 2 negotiating sessions. So that's positive that we're kind of getting to work on that early in the fall. And that's basically where we are with negotiations at this stage. So that brings us to master planning and visioning, and we are joined tonight by Dora and Whittier, who are going to talk a little bit about the phase 2 of the work at the middle school and the high school.
So welcome Lee Dorr and Rob Fitzgerald to the table so they can be heard. So welcome, Lee and Rob.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
So we just wanted to provide the board with an update on the status. We, as you know, completed phase 1 of the study, kind of examining existing conditions of the middle school and the high school, and we're just getting started on phase 2, which is really coupled with phase 1, but we're specifically looking at educational issues and potential options to meet the educational needs of those two facilities for the next 50 years and beyond. And those options will range from the status quo to smaller interventions with renovations to potential renovations and additions. And we'll also look at, the far end of the spectrum of new construction. So you have a good assemblage of cost and options and pros and cons. And this process, we believe, is going to take us from today through periodic updates to the board as we progress through this. And we're hoping to wrap up our study by the end of the year and be able to present a completed document by January. And so Rob Fitzgerald's with me, who's the project manager on this project, and we have a few handouts just to give the board kind of an outline of what that workflow looks like between now and the end of the year and how we're going to accomplish things.
So we've met already. There's a working group that's been formed, made up of administration, facilities, maintenance, as well as we're looking to have a couple students, one from the middle school and one from the high school, be on this working group, and they'll be helping us kind of provide us feedback as we move through the process. We'll be giving presentations to you as the school board. We're anticipating practically once a month. And there's also a visioning committee that is in the planning process currently. And what that is really an effort from the South Burlington School Board to be as open and transparent and community involved as possible. And so we're assisting the school district in helping to form that visioning committee. Right now we're estimating up to 80 people potentially on this committee that would be able to provide some feedback to questions that we raise about some of the issues that they're seeing with the middle school and the high school, and visions for the future, where they see these two schools going, and that'll help inform where we go with the study when we're starting to prepare the options and so forth that Lee just mentioned.
Great.
So you want to walk us through a little bit of...
Sure. So we just handed out this kind of what we call a work plan. It's essentially a working document that we will update as we go along. Along the top there, you'll see I've got extra copies here. We can hand out to people as well.
Some more copies of the same.
So across the top, you'll see, just an outline of the schedule, some dates, milestones. Along the left, we have got different tasks and activities that we're planning to do throughout the course of the study. So we've had our just kickoff meeting with the working group. We're gathering information currently on enrollment, how the school is used currently, how each school is used currently. We've met with the special ed district coordinator, gotten some information from her. We're gathering this questionnaire from each of the principals. We've got an upcoming principals workshop on the 12th of October. It's an all-day session where we're meeting with the principals and potentially some of their staff to hear what works and what doesn't work in each of the schools. Then the advisory committee, for the visiting session, that's ongoing for the next month. We've established a date for that visioning workshop to be on the 7th of November, and this is also an all-day workshop where we'll be gathering together in small groups, discussions, really kind of roll up our sleeves and get some information and feedback from the community and students and faculty and everyone that we can that has a stake in the school district.
I think it's important. One of the key components of what we're doing, at least for this first month and a half, is to be good listeners. And we're really interested in hearing the feedback of where the educational program is going for the future, what the desires are for the district long range, and how the existing facilities may be impeding that, and how we can correct those issues. And we have 2 former teachers on our staff that are educational planners that we work with on all of our educational projects. And they're going to be a part of all of this listening exercise to be working through with that visioning committee and with the administration to kind of tease out some of these issues that we hear, be able to present what other things are happening, throughout New England and around the country, and be able to tie all those things together. And part of that revolves around all that hard work that was done with the NEASC assessment recently. We'll be pulling in some of that information too to see how that looks for the future.
Also involved in this process is taking a tour of other schools throughout New England, examples of what other schools are doing. Sometimes it's easy to just think about your own school or your own city that you live in, but we work throughout New England and we see other schools that are out there, and so we encourage anyone involved in the school district to come on this tour with us to see what else is out there. There'll be a second principals workshop. We'll kind of regroup with the school administration of both schools and make sure that we're on the same page and on the same track as we move forward. We'll start to develop some options, and again, we're also pulling from the phase 1 information as well, the infrastructure conditions of each of the buildings when we're putting these together. And then we have a professional independent cost estimator that will put some costs next to these options. We'll again be meeting with you to go over the advantages, disadvantages, so we can talk through how each option compares to one another. And then we'll be giving presentations and again trying to be as transparent and open and community involved as we go along.
One other piece that we failed to mention was part of phase 1 was kind of identifying and prioritizing some of the issues with the infrastructure of the buildings, and we'll be reporting out on some recommendations on what items need to be looked at for potential budgeting purposes coming up on stuff that has to happen. And we'll also be weighing those issues with some of the options that we're looking at, so we're not spending good money after bad. We want to make sure that investments that are made are kind of long-term.
These are some of the decisions with our stewardship plan as of what we've been using for the last 13 years that we've been mindful of around where we have questions. Instead of putting huge amount of resources in, or we'll say full roof replacements, if the roof is still showing that it has a useful life, we've kind of rescheduled some of those or to push those out a little bit. And I think what Lee's addressing here is similar. We'll be looking for some feedback from them around what might be their recommendations based on a more professional review of some of those conditions that were reported in phase 1 that we'll likely see into our budget that just can't wait.
Right.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that major renovations will not be in this budget cycle. That would be significant things that come out of this visioning process, given what the time schedule is for it, really would be in the following budget cycle. But what Dave is referring to is we wouldn't want to be spending money on buildings that we're potentially doing heavy renovations on or tearing down or doing something so that we're not just spending money that we would have to spend again at some point in the future.
Yeah, so renovations and kind of life safety, the mechanical, electrical, structural pieces, which were part of phase 1, if in some of those areas, those are generally the things you don't, the general eye isn't going to see, but if they are in need of more immediate attention, those are the things that will be included based on the recommendation, and that's important. I.e. roofs can be in there too. They're expensive, and I think to the point is if there's going to be a possible recommendation of an addition or some reconfiguration, can it wait?
Right.
That question, would be one of the important components of that.
So that's kind of where we're at. We're happy to answer any questions, and as we said, we'll be coming back to you regularly with updates as we progress through this.
So the only thing I wanted, this is a nice opportunity, a little bit about the visioning group that we're looking for. We're looking for someone, and Lee said this, around arrived at 80 to 90 folks. We're looking at a pretty good cross-section. Individuals that are listening to us tonight, we're going to be in the process of, putting together kind of an invite. Are you interested? We obviously have some people that have been part of this in the past, part of the master planning. We'll connect back with them and say, would you like to participate? They bring with them some pretty good information, pretty good history, pretty good historical, feedback. And so we would likely have them as well. But we're looking at having individuals that can help us, including students, to provide us with some of the work. It's a day long, as they said. So we recognize that's a lot of time, but we also think it's well worth it to help us inform our decision on a going forward basis. So
question, have you set up a way for individuals to contact you? I mean, if people are listening, do they contact you? Who
I
have you
think
not set that up
absolutely, it's perfect. If they are interested, we have not yet set that formal process up.
Okay.
We are soon to do that. But if there are people that are hearing that tonight or in the audience and would like to be part of that, right now it's scheduled for November 7th. And it's, as we said, all day. It will be at our local hotel. Help me out.
Trader
Duke's. Thank you. And, lunch will be provided, and it will be basically an opportunity for us really to just listen and take their ideas. So people interested, back to myself, copy Delina Gilroy. That would be great.
Mark their calendars for November 7th.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Martin.
Getting that out
Quick.
as soon
That's
as
right.
possible to
Yeah, so that's why I wanted to,
pay off.
that's why I also wanted to just piggyback on that a little bit. We have, again, there's a pretty aggressive timeline, but at the same time, doing our due diligence, I think, on behalf of Dora Whittier to help us through this process, phase 2.
And I believe you said you'll have kind of updates on your website as well. Right?
That's right. That's right. There's other things that I'm working on too. I'm a communication person, and the list goes on. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We are, and we actually, Delina Gilroy, myself, and John Stewart met today to talk about kind of some of the orchestration of those things. And what you'll see is under master planning and visioning, we'll have a date there. We'll post up the meeting dates of the various, an agenda, meeting notes, which Dora Whittier has been good about providing kind of the updates on the minutes, and then any other information that came along with that particular meeting, so people can be informed. And we'll just kind of allow that to be chronological, so people can, whether you made one, or following one, but then not the next, et cetera, we'll be able to do that.
That will be a good venue for folks that aren't able to participate in the visioning session. We'll have all the materials that we're providing and facilitating through that day-long process available for the general public to be able to view, to understand what we're talking about.
Great.
Thank you, Rob and Lee.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay. Next on the agenda is number 9, administrative reports. And tonight we're going to hear about high school personal learning plans, proficiency-based graduation requirements, and proficiencies.
So, joining us tonight is Patrick Burke and Mike Martin. Patrick, as you know, is a high school principal. And yes, and Megan is here too. So welcome, Megan. I didn't see you slip in. And Mike Martin, our director of learning. And so they've prepared some information for you folks. And I don't know, does the advanced thing, is that, you got that going too, Mike?
The clicker, let's see. No,
All right.
that's all right. We'll
We'll
manually
have to,
click.
someone will have to push the button behind you. Sorry for that. Great. You might have to move to the side. Bridget.
Okay.
So thanks for being here.
Great, thanks for having us. So Patrick and I are looking forward to talking a little bit about proficiency-based learning tonight. And I think basically I'm going to be trying to provide a context for where this comes from where the movement, because there's a lot of discussion around proficiency-based learning in New England, around the country, and in Vermont right now. And so I wanted to provide a little bit of a statewide context, and then we'll talk a little more specifically about the high school, and then we'll finish by talking a little bit about how we see transferable skills as the backbone to PLPs, potentially K-12.
One thing I want to mention, again, some board members have been with us a while, some are newer. I don't exactly know the date when Patrick, I think, and Melissa came and spoke about this. Patrick, do you remember? Was it about 2 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, or
Something
more
like
recently than that.
It's been a couple times, I think.
Yeah,
at
so
least.
again, this is consistent with that information. Obviously, there's new information as well, but so again, I just wanted to note that, and again, thanks for your continued work.
Great. So here's our purpose statement, right? So I want to keep that in mind. And then if you forget everything from this presentation, which we'll make available for you to refer back to, the purpose behind this work is not letting a single student slip through the cracks, to make sure that we have a new emphasis on 21st century skills, and that we have great information and students have solid evidence of learning and growth towards them. And then a new clarity about making our curriculum transparent and, again, having evidence of success towards these skills. So the first thing, I just want to take a minute to, like I said, provide this little bit of context for the proficiency-based learning movement. So in other states, they call this mastery-based learning. Sometimes they call it competency-based learning. In Vermont, we call it proficiency-based learning. But this is a national movement. So that's the first thing that I think is important to say, that this is kind of where the field of education is going right now. This is not like a quirky Vermont thing. And having said that, we can find some serious roots in Vermont for this work. Going back to this gentleman who was born just up the street from here on Willard Street, John Dewey in Burlington, who has this famous quote, going back to his text, Experience and Education: we do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And when we think about that, obviously we think about our PLPs, our personalized learning plans. Then those of you that old enough may remember the Vermont plan, the Vermont Design for Education, which was really held sway in the beginning of the 70s. And this statement, I copied and pasted right out of it. The emphasis must be on learning rather than on teaching. And in the proficiency-based movement, this is also a top priority. So it's not a matter of blasting through a certain number of chapters. There's a focus on formative assessment. So we're looking at what's actually being learned here, and do we have to adjust instruction accordingly? So that's it's an idea that's getting a lot of attention right now, but it's actually not a new one when we go back and look at this document from the late 60s. I'm old enough to remember I grew up in Vermont, and I remember that my 5th grade teacher was really freaked out about the basic competencies. And the reason was because we couldn't go on to the next grade if we didn't all show evidence. And so I've got some examples here from the math basic competencies. But that was from the mid-70s. That's where I went to 5th grade, by the way, Fleming School in Essex Junction. And the idea here, again, was sort of like a performance assessment. Can the student actually do this really specific skill? And these were really, you can tell from looking at these, oriented towards life skills. So the skill-based thing. When we look at Vermont's framework of standards, there were content-specific standards. There were a lot of standards in that. Marzano has even said that there were just too many standards for this to be an effective document. But if you look at the vital results going back to this early 2000s document, excuse me, you notice they look a lot like our, our transferable skills. You may have heard of the Common Core. Again, this is they're state standards. They're adopted by state, but this is sort of the closest thing we have to a national framework for standards in English language arts and math. And again, when we look at this standards framework, it's similar. We can see this is like sort of the basis to some of the proficiency work. And then in 2015, the Great Schools Partnership had over 40 districts involved in trainings across the state of Vermont. The grains on the side, one of their big contributions was this idea that standards, there are just too many standards out there. And you have to start using them in concert. So there's a natural hierarchy of standards, with transferable skills being at the top, and then content proficiencies in a supporting role. And then as you go down sort of your curriculum framework, there are learning targets and smaller grain size of standards. So that was a big idea from that training. And again, that's going back a few years. So given all this background, you can see this sort of natural continuation of this work. And I think when we think about the board's role from a community engagement standpoint, when you start to field questions from our community members about proficiency-based learning, I think that's a really big, important idea, that this is actually a natural continuation of our work. This is not from out of left field. This is actually sort of the natural next step in light of these things that have come before. And so when we think, well, why do we call it proficiency instead of standards like we did in the 90s? I think there are a few key differences now that I'll speak to here. So the first one is this idea of, when I went to school, most people got B's and some C's, and very few people got A's and very few people got F's. And of course, that's changed over time, because now really the point is we're trying to get everybody up to a certain place. And so when we think of proficiencies, it's a criterion-based system. It's not a norm-based one. And so, for example, in my physics class, we all really had a lot of resentment towards this one guy named Sean, who was awesome at physics, who blew the scale every single time, because he would ace it, and then we would just fall on this bell curve behind Sean. And so that's really not what we're going for now. Right now, we're trying to say, this is what we want our graduates to be able to do before they go out in the world, and we're going to work really hard to get all of our students up to that place. So the shift to a criterion-based one from a normative one is harder than it sounds. And I was speaking with Patrick earlier today, and we agree that our mission statements and our teachers all see our mission as developing talent, but some of our grading practices really reflect that sorting function, that ranking and selecting talent. So that's a significant shift that's still underway. The other thing, of course, is the internet. So when you think about, the great libraries of the world and how there are these vaults of knowledge, they all fit in our pocket now. Actually, way more than all of them put together fits in our pocket now. And so this idea of schools or libraries or individual teachers as the keepers of the knowledge has changed. And so that really, again, pushes us towards application of learning and transfer of new learning instead of regurgitation or simple recall. And so that needs to be reflected, or I would say better reflected, in our grading and assessment practices. I think another difference, if we want to compare the work that we did in the 90s around standards, in the 90s, we would say, some standards were skills, some were content. I think now when we say proficiency, there's an assumption that we're talking about skills and content working together. So there's no proficiency like on the Civil War. And if somebody tries to tell you there is one, I would argue they don't get it. A proficiency, when in the field right now, when we say proficiency, we're talking about something that's really drawing on both skills and content working in tandem. You can't develop one without the other. Any sort of debate about, is one more important than the other is a moot debate. They're both essential. Of course, there's also brain research now, which shows that a lot of what we used to think of as soft skills are the key predictors of success, of academic achievement, and academic attainment, or I should say achievement in college and career readiness. And so that's changed the way we think about school too. Now we see teachers actually teaching growth mindset, for example, in many of our classes. That reflects new brain research that shows that it makes a difference. So I mentioned the grain size earlier. This is also from the Great Schools Partnership, and this shows that hierarchy. And Patrick, in his segment coming up here, is going to speak to sort of what does this look like at South Burlington High School? So again, just to finish with this idea, the idea that, and this is counterintuitive because as teachers, we all hold expertise in content areas. So typically that's where we start. That would be in the middle. But the shift with the proficiency work that's underway now is actually to start with that portrait of a graduate. What are these key skills that go across discipline areas, and starting to design units that start there and then call on content skills and expertise to support this longer game. So that's that hierarchy of standards I was mentioning.
So as we started to do this work, we needed to really make sure that we were paying attention to where the tension between the old system and the new system was going to come into place. And so, and we really wanted this to be a thoughtful, gradual transition. And so we wanted, so what we did in terms of communicating the shift, and as David said, we've been to the board a few times before, but we're really working with the students and the families of the students that it affects most directly in the moment. And so, so for example, Arnell may not really know a lot about exactly how this is going because he's 2019. If he were a junior, or when you have a junior on the board, the junior would be a lot more familiar with how this system works. And actually, Arnell and his junior friends get report cards that look different, and they have for a few years. Arnell probably gets some proficiency in certain classes. That's likely because they are multi-grade classes. But for our current juniors, that is the cohort, and younger, that's the cohort of high school students and families that we've been communicating most directly with. And I've done that by way of, working obviously with the students at the school, but also in when we have opportunities to have parents at the school. So those kinds of, the low-hanging fruit on that is with the 8 to 9, 8th grade to 9th grade parents. They tend to be obviously really interested in how the high school works, and there's very high attendance at those events. And so we've been dedicating a period of time during all of those events to make sure that we're available to explain the process, because those students are going to graduate based on proficiencies. And that came to us by way of the education quality standards, which in Vermont have the power of law. And it also represents an improvement for us. And I want to talk a little bit about why I think this is a value-added element to our system. And so, but all the way back to that, before we make changes, we need to really look at, there's a couple realities around South Burlington High School, and that's that our students have typically done well in terms of accessing post-secondary opportunities, in terms of accessing whatever it is that they would like to do after high school. And so we have to make sure that we're paying attention to that construct. And so, we talk a little bit about, or I talk a little bit about, we have to make sure that we are, in some respects, holding students harmless in this. We cannot be in a situation where we're not able to communicate with all of our constituencies in terms of how our learners are doing. And so the department heads and the academic leadership team at the high school came up with this grading purpose statement. And all of our changes and all of the things we continue to do, we have to be able to defend based on this grading purpose statement. This is prominently on our website, also in the proficiency-based learning section. And so obviously the most important words in here is the purpose of our grading system clearly, accurately, consistently, and fairly communicates learning progress and learning progress and achievement. And so the people that we want to communicate with obviously are our students, also their families, post-secondary institutions, and prospective employers. And so we can go to the next slide. Oh, I can drive myself. So it's also helpful, I find, when we're talking about these shifts, to talk about what we do now and to look at what we do, what our intentions are going forward. Is there a pointer on this? That would be kind of cool. Nope. So on the left-hand side is a table that includes information about how Arnell is going to graduate and the class of 2019 and all of the classes prior to Arnell. more or less. With almost no exception, Mike Donahue, class of 69, he probably graduated with an 18 credit graduation requirement, maybe 19. We currently have a 20 credit graduation requirement. The way you get credit is you get a grade from an A+ to a D-. The credits required for a diploma are distributed across the program. They reflect what are both a combination of local policy and state law relative to what all high schools need to include. There are minimums from the state. Local districts can add to the minimums. South Burlington has added slightly to what the minimums were. So we're pretty familiar with this. You know, you pass the class, you get a credit. So you look down the far left-hand column, grades A through D-. Yes, those determine graduation. We put those on your transcript. Grade of F does not determine graduation. You don't get credit for that. We still put it on your transcript. Oh, there is a pointer. Thank you. Right on. Your GPA does not determine your graduation, but it goes on your transcript. And we grant graduation credit. We used to call them Carnegie credits or Carnegie units, and those are, there's some math behind how you can earn a Carnegie unit, but the reality is you take a class, you pass it, you get a credit. We're familiar with that. The PBGR system at South Burlington High School, and I guess this is as good a time as any for me to tell you that we are not bound. EQS does have the power of law. We are not bound in terms of implementation practices by the EQS. We need to graduate our students based on proficiencies. The board has adopted our graduation proficiencies. You did that when the current juniors were in 7th grade. So we've had, plenty of maybe 8th grade, but no later than that. So this is all eyes wide open information for us. You may hear from other, hey, my neighbor, they live in another town next to us and they're doing this differently there, and that's quite possible. So the implementation of the PBGR system and the proficiency-based graduation has not been prescribed by the state of Vermont. So many different communities are putting their own stamp on it, as is the Vermont way, and those decisions are being made at the building levels, as is the best practices in terms of things like policy governance, right? So this is how we're doing it in South Burlington. So we are still continuing to give grades. So there's still an element of grades, A through D-. Grades alone are no longer going to determine graduation. Grades will continue to go on their transcript. And I'll come back to what else is going to determine graduation in addition to grades in a second. The grade of F, no change there. That's not going to get you to graduation, and it is going to go on your transcript, unfortunately for some. The GPA is going to continue to be compiled. That just has no connection to graduation, same as always, it never has. That also goes on your transcript. The proficiency attainment, that will determine your graduation, and you can see where it says yes or appeal, and I'll come back to how that works. That is going to go on your transcript. That you have attained proficiency will go on your transcript. Graduation credit is going to be granted, just like in under the old system. We are not calling these Carnegie credits. They are proficiency-based graduation requirement credits. Those will also go on your transcript. And the graduation profile roundtable talks a little bit about what Mike was referencing in terms of making sure that our students are ready for their next step. And that is for those of you who are participating in the sophomore exhibition. There's going to be a senior exhibition sometime during second semester junior year, first semester senior year, where students are going to have to assemble their graduate profile, which is really going to be the compilation of a number of different artifacts that will help them when they exit. So things like a resume, external assessments, recommendations, etc. So that's what our graduate profile roundtable is going to be focused on. So there are 4 scenarios for a student in the class of 2020. They can pass a class, they can score as proficient on their for their PBGRs, and in that case, the PBGR graduation credit's granted. Okay, most of our students are going to fall in that category, and I say most, I mean a pretty significant majority of students are going to pass their classes and they're going to score as proficient in their PBGRs. If a student fails the class and scores as not proficient in their PBGRs, they're not going to get credit. That's, that kind of stands to reason, and they're going to have to take the class again, or we'll figure out a different way for them to get there. If a student passes their class and scores as not proficient on a PBGR, or if a student fails the class and scores as proficient on their PBGR, each of those students is going to have to appeal for credit. And so what a credit appeal is let's take the student, for example, who passes the class but scores as not proficient. Again, these are a pretty significant minority, but that student will then go, the teacher, the student, someone from the family, school counselor, there's a meeting. At that meeting, the teacher and the student are going to talk about how we got there, how did that happen? And that conversation is going to really dictate what happens to this credit appeal. That conversation could be the teacher saying, look, you're really close. There's a few more things that I think, you're just missing, and, here's how you can get there. Or it could be the student coming in and saying, I didn't do it the way that, the 3 or 4 different ways that I was asked to do it, but here's another way that I think I've done it. And that panel can determine that student is proficient in that area. Or basically the outcome of one of these 2 meetings is either appeal granted or appeal granted when the following conditions are met. And so, we see this as these situations or scenarios 3 and 4 as the real value added element to our program for all students. And let me tell you why. Let's take a student who graduates, and we all knew this person when we were in high school, straight C's and D minuses. Okay. Would you bet your house that person is ready for their next step? And the answer is probably no. And, but they, maybe I knew a guy who got straight D's. He was actually pretty sharp and, he did great, but I wouldn't have bet my house on it at the time. And I certainly wouldn't have been able to say that the system had any evidence that he was, or she was ready. So under this system, we are going to make sure that those big proficiencies that we know connect to our students' post-secondary success in college and career readiness are non-negotiable, and that all of our students are going to show that they can do that at a level that will assist them when they get out of high school. Another example that's a little bit below the line that is also helpful to think of when you imagine this is in our NALS class, students all did their sophomore exhibitions. And during your sophomore exhibition, you talk a little bit about this is my primary strength. This is my primary area for growth, right? And so if a student goes in there and says, my primary strength is math, I really love math, it's excellent, I always do well in it, and I just enjoy it. And my primary area for growth is reading. I'm just don't like to read, I'm not really a reader, and, it's not something I'm into. That student, when planning their junior and senior year, could be okay, I'm going to take public speaking and advanced comp. And you know what they just did? They just avoided reading. And they just avoided and now they're going to go to college and they can say, I'm going to engineering school. And you know what they're going to do when they get to engineering school? They're going to read a lot. And they may not be ready for that. And they kind of slip through. So sometimes when we think about students slipping through the cracks, we're always kind of imagining students who are not being successful in ways that we traditionally measure it. But there are students who are kind of being successful in ways that we traditionally measure it that we may be also missing. So in that scenario now, that student is going to have to show that they are proficient in reading. And so we will make sure that student, maybe takes an engaging with literature class, which is a high interest, reading class that builds student stamina in the area of literacy. Or maybe they take a grammar, usage, and mechanics class if writing was something that they were challenged by. So you can see how the new system does kind of meet Mike's, bullet point number 1 in terms of takeaways, which is that concept that we really don't want to make sure that no one's falling through the cracks in terms of our graduation standards. And these are our 5 student learning expectations. These are all graduation requirements. We have these 5, and then we have content area graduation requirements in all of our content areas. The student learning expectations are students will have multiple opportunities to show that they are proficient in these 5 throughout the program. So these have been actually distributed to different departments, and so there's not, we're not going to have a clear and effective communication department. We're not going to have a self-direction class, but students are going to be taught and assessed clear and effective communication or informed and integrative thinking within content areas. And that is how, and those, the assessments, the teacher level classroom assessments of students' skills in these 5 areas are going to, or proficiency in these 5 areas are going to appear on their report cards in a formative sense. They're, and for our 9th and 10th graders and our current 11th, for our current 11th graders, since they were in grade 9, they've been getting feedback on these 5 areas of proficiency. So these SLEs, this is like my tag back to Mike, will provide us with some really nice jumping off points. And I think about all of our sending schools, so Tuttle Middle School and or Georgia and the Islands. Like if I want to go up to Georgia and the Georgia parents say to me, how can we make sure that our students are ready for, South Burlington High School? We really want them to be ready. We're excited for them to go there. I'm not going to say to them, well, make sure they know the Revolution, because we start U.S. history after the Revolution. And if they come in here without knowing the Revolution, they're just not going to be successful. It's neither true nor helpful. If I was going to go to Georgia now, I would go up there and I would say, these are the 5 things. If your students and if Georgia and if are working with our sending schools, Georgia Islands and Tuttle, and then by extension the pre-K through 5s and SB, if we can work on these 5 areas, kind of like regardless of the content, then I feel like the students will be being adequately prepared for what comes next.
Yeah, thanks. And if I could just stay with this slide for just 1 minute more, I think that the board will recognize some really, really clear connections to our ends here, right, when we look at these. And when we think about clarity on the takeaways of the why of this work, the clarity comes from saying this is what we're going to do. This is, we have our ends. Now we have SLEs that actually match them. We're going to graduate students based on evidence towards those ends. So that's a much clearer connection now. And for students who too often have to figure out a different grading game in every single classroom of the building, here is some transparency in curriculum to say, okay, here are our top goals. And then in each content area too, here are the top PBGRs. And then there's common language across commonly taught courses. And here, these are cross-curricular, so school-wide. To go to the K-12 piece that I think Patrick was starting to speak to, when we think about the PLP's work, those 5 questions, here they are, those 5 student learning expectations in the form of I statements. And I think when they're, you can tell I modified the wording a little bit, but I think put this way, we could have kindergartners asking, who am I as a citizen? Who am I as a thinker? Who am I as a learner? If we can flip back, I don't think we'll be asking 2nd graders, are you an informed, integrative thinker? I don't think we'll be doing that. But I think we could do this. And this could actually be the backbone to a K-12 PLP process that would look different in every school, but that gets at these big ideas. And I think that's what we want. We want our students to be thinking about these things. And when we talk to business owners, by the way, this is what they keep asking us for. They keep saying, can you send us people who are good at this stuff? So I think that's what we want to end with. Oh, this is a lot of work. And so I really, as a new person coming into this district, I have a lot of admiration for the work that I'm still learning about around the district, and the dedication and flexibility of teachers who are embracing this, this shift in instruction and curriculum. And this is from last week. There's a new leading proficiency series with several districts all participating. These pictures are taken at the Essex Resort, and you can see we had a high school and a middle school table. So we expect the system to work a little differently at the middle school with their teaming structure, but they're also part of the work and very much interested in improving alignment with the high school and having some common language. So again, families don't have to relearn language every time their student changes schools. So I just wanted you to know that teachers and administrators are hard at work in this area. There's plenty of work ahead still. Also a shout out to Alyssa McDonald, who's done a lot of work with curriculum mapping, and the same with the department heads who have really been important leaders of the work. To find out more, I think hopefully we still have time for a couple of questions from the board that we can maybe take note of and then bring back. But in the meantime, if you want to learn more, Patrick has done a great job of just kind of sharing the work at the website. You can see this is under the Families tab, and he's said, here's what's going on. This is why we're doing the work and how it's going to work at South Burlington High School. And again, I think we just want to end with this idea. You heard Patrick speak really clearly to this idea that proficiency is sort of like a guarantee to our community that we're not going to send our students out into the world not ready for college and careers. There's this new emphasis on skills, I think, that comes from business leaders, that comes from some of the brain research, and that comes from the internet that we now have on our phone, in our pockets. And then there's this common language, right? This clarity. We want to be really clear about our expectations. We want them to match our ends, and we want that to make that really transparent to students, teachers, and families. So, thanks.
Questions from the board?
A couple questions. So this was great. It was very helpful, first of all, and hopefully more parents who have questions about proficiency-based learning will watch this on RETN. But when you were setting the proficiencies, how did you make sure? I'm sure you did, but how did you make sure that the standards for proficiency were high enough to ensure that our students will be successful in their next steps, be it career, college, or armed forces?
So we, in the core content, all of our core content area proficiencies are benchmarked to what amount to national standards, either the Common Core State Standards or the Next Generation Science Standards. And so that's, and those are, those standards, both Next Gen Science and Common Core State Standards, came out of the national work around what students need to know and be able to do to be ready for their next step. So when we went in to do the work, Martin, that was definitely something that we had to pay attention to, and we got some help from the state on that, but we mostly drew our resources from the national level and what was happening around the country.
Right. So I mean, it's not really a concern, but it's actually something I've thought about when this has been introduced, is getting the sweet spot as far as setting those proficiencies for success, but understanding, understanding that, but I want them to be high enough so we assure success. But what I've always thought that would mean is that it may cost the district more to make sure every one of our students goes out the door with that level of proficiency. In other words, I don't want to see the proficiencies set too low so that people aren't successful, but that we can make sure everybody can be proficient, but not too high either. I mean.
Yep, I follow you. And actually, this is a little ironic, but I spend a lot of time making sure that that's the case. And where the rubber really hits the road with that, Martin, is the classroom level assessments. And so when teachers are designing those classroom level assessments, where are they setting that proficient mark. And that's actually one big reason why we never score 9th and 10th graders at the graduation level. We score them at the, like basically on target or on track to be towards proficient. And then we start scoring juniors and seniors at the graduation level. And that was by design to make sure that we were able to set the bar where it should be, you know, for grades 9 and 10, and then set the bar where it should be for grades 11 and 12. One thing that's easy to forget in this work is how easy it is to meet our old graduation requirements. And so that's the other piece to the puzzle that I need to make sure that I'm putting in front of the teaching faculty and the department heads also, is that, you know, I don't mean easy, but we have like a 90+%, high 90% graduation rate, especially if you count a 5-year graduation rate. And so, you know, this should not, and it was one of the first slides I showed the staff, is that like this work should not change our graduation rate. You know, we should not have more students not graduating on time. We should not have more students graduating necessarily early out of the gate. I think that may change a little bit in the future. But the other thing is, in terms of like resources, I think within the program, by controlling by giving students multiple opportunities to show that they're proficient, and by making sure that they are being thoughtful about their course selection in terms of where they're going to hit their proficiencies, I think we can do it within our current program of studies. If we can't, we're gonna have to change the program of studies, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be additional in terms of resources. I think we can do it with what we currently have. You know, and if I'm wrong about that, I'll be back.
Right, sure.
You know?
Just a follow-up, I mean, because, yeah, I'm fine if we keep at 97, 98% graduation rate. That would be great, so long as I understand that that means we're putting in the extra effort for those kids that are not getting to proficiency, as opposed to having lower standards. I would also be fine, frankly, although the budget might not be as much, that we drop down to 90% for that 4-year graduation rate, but we are making sure the kids, when they leave in their 5th year, this is, you know, something we probably wouldn't want to hear, but I mean,
No, I agree with what you're
either
saying.
of those. I want to make sure that the kids are getting out at a proficiency level that really is going to make the difference. So, all right.
The other piece of this, and I'm sorry because I'm a talker, but the other, and I'm slightly passionate about this. The other piece to this that hasn't come up a lot tonight, but the proficiency-based model really enables personalization. And so when we talked about passing classes to get credits to graduate, we were really expecting all students to do it the same way, more or less. You know, under the proficiency-based system, if you go back to that credit appeal meeting, that student who walks in there and says, "You're telling me I'm not a proficient communicator. I can show you 15 ways when I got my Eagle Scout that I was a proficient communicator." And you know, if we want to sit at a round table and dismiss the evidence that this student comes in with 15 examples of being an effective communicator as they got their Eagle Scout or their Gold Star from Girl Scouts, well, you know, shame on us. So I think that it's also about making sure that the opportunities for kids to show they're proficient do have that personalized element to them, because that, and that might help us. But again, right now, we don't know that, you know, but that might, under the new system, it might help us could keep that bar where it should be, and not have to expend, you know, additional resources or see our graduation rate drop.
So one clarification question, if I could as well. So the students still will have to have 3 years of math, 2 years of PE, et cetera. I mean, there's still those kind of requirements. But proficiency is
kind of. For now, yes. For now, yes. I mean, that's the pathway to get there for now.
okay.
I mean, it's a weird thing to think about because we only have a 3-year graduation requirement in science. Arnell can't name 5 people who aren't taking a science class in his senior class. So 97% of our seniors take a 4th year of science. Not one of them needs to take it. They've all met the graduation requirement in science already. So it's those year requirements, with the exception of English, which is our only 4-year requirement. In our system, they've really only reflected a real bare minimum, and the vast majority of our students exceed those across the program. You know, most students, you know, our music students take 4 years, you know, they take 4 years of music, you know, our students take 4 years of art, you know.
But they can gain proficiencies in the multiple courses that they would be taking, right? So somebody who has, you know, is, you know, far more interested and comfortable in music or mathematics or science, those proficiencies can be earned in those different areas, which is the power of allowing kids to flourish and readying them for their next steps, which is a beautiful thing to see happen for our learners, right? As they go from wanting to be everything in kindergarten, every possible job there is, to help them to narrow their focus to those passions that we hopefully have exposed them to over time, you know?
Can
Yeah.
I just ask could you just say another word though about, there's sort of an interplay there, right, though, between personalization and proficiency and making sure, so here's just, this is a total anecdotal example. And I should also say, I am totally in support of PBGRs, and I think it's great. I mean, my kids have been I have very young kids, but they've been since preschool getting proficiency-based report cards on every detail of how they do at math. Can they count this high? Can they do these different things? So I'm very comfortable as a parent with that. My question is, when you're giving kids a lot of power to personalize, how do you avoid that slipping through? So for example, my son came home today, and it's the first time I've really heard him start to use the language. He's a 4th grader. He started to use the language really of personalization. And he said, you know, we've been doing this science unit, and we kind of have 3 different ways that we can show that we have understood the material. And how do you make sure that they're not sort of going always the direction they're comfortable? Because I was listening to those 3 things, and I'm thinking, you're not going to do the writing one, because that's not the one you're comfortable with. So you'll do either of these other 2 every time if given the choice. How do you make sure that the personalization isn't sort of tripping us up on making sure that there's proficiency across all of the different things?
So that's a great question. And it's one that there's a paradox, which is it's only when you're really clear on what you're assessing that you can then that the options open up. So an example would be, if you're assessing writing, probably a stylus is going to be involved, or depending if you're, you know, grammar, usage, and mechanics, maybe you're typing. But if you're assessing narrative, right, that could be a slide deck, that could be a storyboard, that could be, you know, a short video, that could be a podcast. So it could be any number of things. So it really, it's only when you get clear on exactly what you're assessing that then these options open up. And the second thing that I heard you kind of speak to is, what if it's always the same option? And so I think that there's been enough thought that's gone into setting these proficiencies that you can't slip through the cracks that way either. That we're going to provide, we're going to make sure that all of our students are great writers and great communicators, and not pick one over the other.
A better example too than the Eagle Scout example would have been chorus class. If we're telling a student they're not a good, a clear and effective communicator in their social studies class, based on the assessments that were given in the social studies class, and that student comes to the credit appeal meeting and says, "Let me show you the 7 times my chorus teacher found me to be a clear and effective communicator," then okay, you know, we're going to imagine that student has met that, or we're going to sanction or verify that student has met that graduation requirement. Because we still have distribution requirements in the core content areas, including writing, including reading, the concern that students will personalize their way out of their challenges is mitigated.
Alex, question?
I just want to say thank you for the presentation. It was really excellent. There are some people in the general public that have been asking for this sort of information, and I was wondering if it would be possible to perhaps share the PowerPoint with I believe it's a Facebook group called SB Community Watch. I don't know, do you know who the administrator is? She may be interested in posting the PowerPoint that you gave us tonight
Sure.
on that website.
Well, what we've typically done though, Alex, with that is we have sort of said, hey, it's on the district website,
Yes.
and we've had people point to it. It gets a little dicey when we have people posting our stuff to
Okay.
their websites, but yeah, we can certainly reach.
So is the PowerPoint on our district
So
website? Because I
we
wasn't-
wanted to present it to you first,
Yeah,
and then, but in the next couple of school days, Patrick and I can make sure that it appears on this page here.
okay,
the
that would be
proficiency
excellent.
base.
Thank you
I-
very
I
much.
think the other part is, both have mentioned that, Patrick has, on the high school page, has had a fair amount of information.
Yeah,
I think what I've heard is several board members, through community conversation, has had several questions around where we are going,
yeah.
how we are grading, what about proficiencies, and I think the buzz has been around the communities that, we're gonna drop grades totally, and, that's not obviously what you're hearing.
Yeah.
But there's rationale and reason for why we're doing what we're doing, and I think it's important that, we, board, collectively, have the opportunity to direct people to for clarity, and I think this PowerPoint, for instance, will be helpful, and pointing people back to the sources where we can help, inviting them to our meetings, asking more questions is only going to help us. Again, not just if you have children in the system, but it could be a business owner, a community member, whatever the case may be. We want to make sure people understand, because it's all a pretty important circle to a healthy community.
Yeah, I really agree with Bridget in that even posting the PowerPoint without the talking, I mean, we talked a lot. There are just a few words on the PowerPoint. The proficiency-based learning section of the high school webpage, which is actually linked to the student link, the family link, the staff link, the community link. So it's linked to all of our, no matter who you are. But this page has been up for quite some time. And also it's changed in that people have asked me some questions. They've said, I've gone to this page and I don't understand this one piece. And I've thought, okay, that's a helpful question. And I've answered their question, but then I've gone in and changed what's on the website
Right.
so that, it really clearly communicates what we are doing and what we're not doing. And so I feel like in the case of this, for one reason or another, I've had to make sure to explain what we're not doing as much as I have had to explain what we are doing, and I just want to honor that, and I really respect the fact that, at a school like mine, it's when you're at a school that there's a high degree of satisfaction and students are pretty successful, any kind of change has to be really deliberate, and I've certainly, been there a long time. I'm certainly aware of what's at stake when it comes to this, and so I would encourage. This isn't linked to the district webpage, so if you wanted to link it to the district webpage, that might be good. And then if you wanted to push it out to the community page that you referred to, it's also on the high school now has a Facebook page. So first time we're like leaping into the early 2000s. But we have a Facebook page, and so I can put it up there as well.
Can I ask, just as I said, I'm completely in support of what you're doing. One of the questions we do get, though, from the community a lot is there have been struggles in other states with PBGRs, and the example everyone keeps giving is that Maine is going away from them or dropping the requirement, not necessarily going away from them, but they're dropping the legal requirement for them. And so what we get from a few people who are resistant to this change is this just a fad? Is it, and you have a lot of information here about how this has been built up over time. But where are the other states, really for two reasons, why are they struggling so much, and our states, some of them going away from it? And where are the others? Because the other question we get constantly is, what about my kid who's college bound, or I insist is college bound, and how are they going to compare to other kids when they're applying to colleges, and what does this look like if Vermont's the only one doing it, which is clear that we're not, but just what is sort of the percentage of the country, say, that's sort of at this level that Vermont is? How far out ahead are we, or are we kind of on track with others?
Yeah, I mean, our students apply to colleges all over the world, and mostly all over the U.S. And so when I'm putting together a transcript, it needs to be a transcript that is decipherable. That going back to our grading purpose statement, we need to clearly, accurately, consistently, and fairly communicate and post-secondary institutions are on that list. And so we're not going to be sending transcripts that actually look very different than what we've been sending in the past. I mean, we are still collecting grades. Students are still cobbling together a GPA. And for the post-secondary institutions that want to, point to a cut score GPA, of which there are a few, fewer than people think. And for those, it's their prerogative to do it. They're going to continue to do it. And I do, and Megan Sweet is here, and she's our new guidance director, and then working with Tim Weil, that's square on our mind. We definitely have to be really good communicators with those post-secondary institutions. I could sit here and complain about the post-secondary process all I want, and it is a wholly imperfect process, and I have a lot of opinions about that, but nonetheless, our students engage in that process. It's important to the community, and we will continue to represent our students in the most favorable light, in the most clear, accurate, consistent, and fair way. And so for us right now, that includes continuing to have grades on transcripts and continuing to assemble GPAs.
I think just going back to the regional and national part of your question, I think the main message that we'd want to share with our community is this is not a fad, and this is part of a national shift in the way we think about learning. And when you go back to the slides at the top of this presentation, those are not things that just affect Vermont.
Right.
So whether it's the, the non-cognitive skills from the brain research, the advent of the internet in your pocket, all those things apply, and all those things really call for shifts in education. And so I think, the devil's in the details. And what we've seen in some states is maybe, saying like a lot of the things that the assurances that Patrick's been provided tonight weren't provided. And so if you're in a situation where it's like, grades are bad, throw out the grades, or if you're not taking the time to have conversations like this one about, wait, why are we doing all this work, and what are we trying to achieve by this work? And when those conversations haven't taken place, it's led to, a backlash. And I think, in different states, it's played out differently. I think in Maine, it was really politicized in a way that we've seen Common Core, for example, politicized in other states. However, Common Core is still, a national reference point. It's, so it's not going away, I guess I would say.
One other thing, we have Noah here too, as a special educator at the high school, and I think about, we talk about all students, right, and the opportunity to, universal design, and I think about this process supporting all students, and I think it's an important attribute, and Noah, not to put you on the spot, but as you,
this is huge for me.
yeah,
It's like my dream. I'm 100% not. If anything, I'm just pushing you faster.
But for a long time,
Legitimate.
but for a long time, Noah, and you probably would agree that for students that have different learning styles, it was difficult for students to work through the system, and right?
The thing I would add the most that I'm sure they would say if we had more time is that this changes the conversation from did I get a 90 to what it is that I need to do. And it's happening all over South Burlington High School right now, talking with kids, what is it you need to do? And I can say, this isn't about you getting a 90. This is what you need to be able to do. And it enables that relationship to build. It's very good, important.
Thanks, Noah.
Yeah, that works.
I guess my only question about that is, what about the kids who are motivated by the scoreboard? Like just purely the scoreboard? Because for some kids,
That's right. They can still get their A's.
Yeah.
okay.
They can still get their A's. But as I said, there may be some students. I mean, I don't think there's going to be too many students getting A's who are showing to be not proficient. I mean but there are students who maybe did their homework. They were really good class participants. They're very nice. Everything they do is like B-. But really, when it comes to, are we 100% betting the house on the fact that they're ready for their next step? And I feel much more. I feel like this system has much more integrity to that end. So, and students are I would hope that the students who are motivated by the scoreboard are really motivated learners, you know, and as Noah was referencing, you know, putting the learning in the center of the conversation instead of the grade. And, you know, I mean, what's the difference between a 90 and a 91 in terms of what you know and can do? I don't, you know.
The other thing that I would add is, you know, we know that some students are really, really good at memorizing things for the quiz on Friday and then forgetting them and then going on to the next challenge. And then we wonder why, when we have assessment that's set up that way, that really just encourages recall and regurgitation and sort of, you know, lower order skills, that's not setting our kids up for success in college. And maybe that's part of why we have, you know, a 40% dropout rate in college right now, nationally. It's something like that. Now, out of the students that drop out, some of them still are going to have college debt. And again, that 40% national average that goes up and down a little bit, but it hovers around there. That's after 6 years. So that's like a cohort, you know, 6 years after students start. And so those are just the students that, again, got into college, right? When you think about 40% of them not having a degree, a bachelor's degree, a 4-year degree, 6 years after they start, but maybe having debt, it's a little bit of a national crisis. And so I think this is really addressing, like, what are those skills that they're missing that we're actually not doing a good enough job teaching and assessing, like Noah was saying.
Well,
So
Patrick,
I think the
yeah.
board's asked a lot of questions. There are a few members of the public here. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Pat or Mike?
I just have one more comment.
Yeah.
And this kind of goes to what Martin was saying too, and this discussion, but having conversations about learning is how you extend to the right place for everybody. And I think that often we get stuck in the, like, there's just one mark for all learners. And the beautiful thing about this is, instead of saying, where's the bar that's exactly perfect for everyone, we can say,
right.
this is our learner, we've got amazing data on them, kindergarten on through, and we're seeing progress that lets us know our system is working, and we're seeing outcomes that student and family desire. As a special educator, it's like my thing. So the bar can be where it is appropriate for that person. So our motivated learners who are just motivated by A's can be talking about Harvard from kindergarten on through, and our people who want to drive machinery, the guy I've been thinking about, you know, he can be motivated by that, and we can be saying, look, we know what people who are going to have that outcome look like as learners and be successful in that job. Harvard, lawyers, and we can backwards track. I applied for a rolling grant that I didn't get last year, we can assemble that information looking backwards so that our conversations about learning can be about, this is what learners like you do after high school. This is the data we have. So I just think it's a really powerful way to break the idea that everybody's going to end in the same spot, because that's not really likely. Sorry, thanks.
Thank you.
Tricia.
Yeah, I just want to thank you again. I've heard this spiel, you know, probably 4 or 5 times, and every time I learn something different, have a little twist, how it affects our family, but also the bigger picture. So I'm really excited about it. It's great. I think what's helpful too, my daughter's been lucky to have been doing this since she was younger, because she was in some private school and do it at home. But also she'll be able to see her peers also be in that same mindset. And I think it'll raise the motivation a little bit with some kids and get them to look at from different perspectives. I also have a kid who is motivated by grades, but this helps me as a parent to shift away from that and say, yes, but you're really fixating on the grade. Now let's look at what you learned. Yes, you're good at it, but where are your weaknesses? You know, that is such an important conversation. We actually hit that today. So this is great, because you'll be talking about it and I'll be talking about it. And it'll be global. So, thanks, I learned something else tonight.
Thank you very much for all the hard work, Pat, that's gone into it, and thank you, Mike, for coming on board.
Keep it going. We'll come back.
Join
We'll
us
come back, you know,
tonight, too.
anytime.
Yes.
If you could try to not schedule this when the Yankees are in the playoffs on the night of it, so that would be helpful.
Very
Arnell, it's
thoughtless
opening
of us.
night of the NHL season. Arnell has his Bruins on, so, you know, but next time when you're looking at calendars,
What's the score?
you know, I don't know.
Really?
He's been paying
My phone, I
attention.
thought about it. Aaron Judge hits a 2-run home run. The Yankees lead the Athletics 2-0.
We're all
My
finished.
update.
You make. Move on to the important things.
So
Yes.
Mike, thank you, Patrick, thank you,
Thank
Megan,
you.
thank you, Noah,
Thank you,
thank
Megan.
you. Yeah.
Thanks, Noah. Okay, so we are on to policy work, the student freedom of expression policy, our second reading.
Yes, so we brought this to you the first time last. We utilized, just giving a little backdrop, sorry for redundancy, board.
That's great.
The Vermont School Boards Association model policy. We made a few tweaks to that on the onset, and then at the board meeting, we all essentially agreed and had some feedback specific from Martin, Mike Donahue, I think weighed in, a couple other board members weighed in on some suggested changes. This document here in your packet represents those changes, we believe, to the best of our ability. But that's where we are today, and it is not up for action, it's up for second reading. So,
Okay.
I am surprised Martin didn't make this comment before I did, but on page 2, item 4.
page 2, what? Item 4?
Ooh,
Yeah. Actually, if you look at the bottom of the third page, under authority and cross-reference, it says legal references, 16 capital V period, capital S period, capital A period. We should probably have that formatted.
Up there, on
Yeah.
4.
Yeah, so it's 16 VSA, section 11. So.
I think they might both work, but I'm fine with
You think?
that. Yeah, I think so. I think that's good, though.
Or both, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. So I had a couple things as well. So going to the first paragraph,
Under
where
policy?
on the policy,
Mhm.
where we strike including students. I think we need to put that back in, because this really is, you know, I understand that the district recognizes that all citizens have these rights, but I think this is student policy, I think that we should put the language in. And that's from the statute, I believe. So I would suggest that. The second suggestion is changing may to can in the sentence down there. You say may access their right to free speech. I don't think this is, I think that the point here is that we're not just allowing it, but we're enabling the access to the right to free speech. I mean, it's a minor change, but in deference to Mike Donahue, who suggested that change to me, I think that we should, you know, it makes some sense. I think that's the rationale for it as well. So he didn't give me the rationale. I had to come up with that myself. So in any event, the next one is really a question, something to ponder a little bit, is in the definitions in the media advisor, the language there doesn't quite match what's in the statute. The statute provides that this person will supervise or provide instruction, and we've added oversight and guidance. I think guidance is not much different than instruction, and I don't have a problem with guidance. The question is whether oversight is putting a little bit too much of the administration's, there's two
Influence.
sides of this. A little too much of the administration's influence on the one side, but the other is we are putting this responsibility on students. It's not just you get to choose the content and have that freedom of speech, but there are responsibilities with that, such as you shall not libel people, you shall not break laws and such. If we had oversight in there, does it kind of capture that? Is it a little bit
Gives
more
the
of a
students an out almost.
It's a
to
little bit
say-
of a
yeah.
safety net
Yeah,
for
yeah.
students, although I don't know if we want to give them a huge amount of safety net or not. And I am eager to hear Mike's input on that one, but I think that probably should stay. And Mike had not suggested to me that it should go. That was something I was thinking of. All right, the final one is in the last paragraph. There's a little bit of confusion in that paragraph because there are three things that are dealt with there. It says transfer to take, so you can't be disciplined, et cetera, for taking reasonable appropriate action to protect a student journalist in conduct protected by this policy, that's definitely the student we're talking about, for exercising their right to free expression. And it's not entirely clear if we're talking about the student's right there, and therefore I would add, and then the third is, or for refusing to infringe on conduct that is protected by this policy. That one goes to the media advisor. In other words, the first and second items relate to the students, that the student journalist in conduct protected by this policy, or the students exercising their right. That third item is for refusing, and that's the advisor refusing. Does that make sense? I mean, you've got kind of different. So I think if we put in, to clarify, that second phrase for exercising their right, if we say for the students exercising their right to free expression, and to make it really clear, one could also then say, or for the advisor refusing to infringe.
So you have me confused now on
So-
what recommendations.
So my recommendation is that for exercising their right to free expression, where you should say for the students exercising their right to free expression, and then it's, or for the advisor, well, we can say media advisor, refusing to infringe on
Gotcha.
conduct
Yeah.
that is protected by this policy.
Gotcha, thanks, Martin.
So those are the changes I have, and I'd like to hear folks' viewpoint on oversight, on whether that one should stay or go.
I would take it out. I feel like it gives responsibility back to that media advisor that really should rest with the students if we're really giving them freedom of expression.
Okay.
That's where I am. I don't know where Alex and Steve or Elizabeth might be.
I would agree with that, Bridget.
I agree with you too, Bridget.
Okay, good.
Okay.
So I have those changes, Megan, I can give them to you, and
Does anyone else have any comments on the board?
we'll change this one too.
Okay, anybody in the public? Mike, do you have any other things to add?
And I wasn't quite sure what you were striking there, or changing that last bit, which part?
You can clarify.
Yeah,
Can we
Martin.
clarify that? So it's the last paragraph.
Yeah.
That you can't be disciplined, et cetera, for taking reasonable and appropriate action to protect a student journalist in conduct protected by this policy, for the students exercising their right to free expression, or for the media advisor refusing to infringe on conduct that is protected by this policy.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't quite sure in the middle there, the word there, whether that referred to the student or the advisor. That was one point I had, and whether, on that second one, whether it should be for allowing students the right to exercise their right to free
I
expression.
think that's what it
And
means.
or whether you make it the advisor too, but that's here nor there. Going back to what Martin said, yes, I would encourage you to restore including students in that first paragraph. I mean, since this is a student freedom of expression, that's what the headline is on this. I think you ought to drive home the point that it really is about student, and not just talking about all citizens having it. Agree with the can versus may. And as far as definitions of media advisor, I'd support striking supervise and maybe oversight, and just to leave it to provide guidance and instruction. I mean, I think that's what advisors do. They advise, they provide guidance, but again, it's up to the students.
So I think supervises in the statute, so I would leave, the only thing I'm suggesting that we strike, and everybody, I think, has agreed, is oversight.
Yeah, I wasn't keen on oversight there.
Yeah, so, good.
And, yeah, I think the rest you covered.
Good, thank you. So it comes back for one more
Great.
reading,
Yes, it
right?
does, yeah.
One more reading,
We'll make the changes and bring it back. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike, for all your input.
Thank you.
And thank you, Martin, for taking a lead on that.
And I think you make it comes up in the state with the policy, so.
Well, all right.
That's nice.
That's good.
All right, on to executive limitations policy monitoring action, treatment of staff. This was continued from a previous meeting.
So we told you this would come back because of the, some information specific to teacher evaluation and the
Uh-huh.
number.
Yep.
And so I'll have Mike come back up and answer any questions that you have, but we've updated the number in your packet, and I'm sorry I'm making you
Looking
flip
for the
through the pages
page.
to find that, but
It
page
looks like
8
8
of
of
8,
8,
page
yeah.
8, thank you. And so you see there that we've made some progress. Of the 110 due, we've received 54, up from 30. We're still not compliant, and you've heard that a little bit before, but we're open to answer other questions that you folks might have related to the violation. Mm-hmm.
Or do we just have you keep bringing it back to us until?
No, you would go through the policy, and you're looking at, is there an adequate plan for, compliance plan? Is it acceptable, you know? Is really what the purpose is, that I'm out of compliance. Is the compliance plan acceptable, yes or no? If it's no, then, you know, I have some work to do before we, you know.
Maybe it would be helpful if I shared some of the work that we're doing.
Thank you,
That
Mike.
would be great, I was gonna say.
Great, sure. So, as you know, I've been in this position since July 1st of this year. And so some of the things that I've learned about sort of where we're at with this goes back to the Sarah Denny report that was commissioned. The board actually commissioned a report. And that, I think, still has valuable recommendations that still haven't been really fully implemented to date. One of them was looking at a pilot, to pilot a streamlined evaluation process that would provide more timely and meaningful feedback to teachers as part of the process, instead of something that was overly burdensome and overly formal. The other thing, too, I guess that I would say is that, you know, 99% of the time, an evaluation process is really a validation of great work for teachers. And when there are difficulties with a teacher, then there's an improvement plan that kind of that's put in place. Mm-hmm. And that, you know, there's a shift in the work at that time. And so at this time, where our conversations, we've had a meeting this week where we spent about 90 minutes really doing a deep dive with the entire leadership team at David's house, who's a wonderful host, by the way. Really trying to get all the cards on the table about what's working, what's not working. And one document, a guiding document that I inherited from my predecessor, identifies this year as the second year of a pilot process. So at our next meeting, we're going to hear from Holly Ruel and Lissa McDonald, who have both tried some piloting, some new approaches with walkthroughs and with more formative type feedback for teachers. And at the same time, I've been working with our human resources director, Karen Dancher, and Meg Collins, seated on my left, to look at improved tracking process through Google or through possibly another platform where we can compile the evidence that's being collected. So it's not this paper chase and tracking, chasing down signatures over the summer from teachers to complete the process. So I think right now where we're at, the process is kind of really defining the challenge, looking at the pilots that have taken place and fully trying to learn from them. We haven't really extracted the learning, what we've learned from those pilots yet. And then kind of really working hard. I had a meeting with David about this earlier today to look to, okay, how can we up our game as early as next semester coming out of some of these meetings? And David, Joanne Godek, and I really agree that, you know, this is one of the most important things that we do when we think about its impact on student learning, is to do a great job with our teacher evaluation system. And so we are going to commit to, with the full leadership team, to, you know, studying this and really moving, kind of starting a design process to retool and to look at what's not working and then provide support as needed. So maybe that means getting subs for a day for some principals so they can just spend the entire day going out into classrooms and just knocking out observations or finishing write-ups of summative observations. So right now I think there's a perception that we're not getting enough bang for our buck given the current model, but we're sort of between models. We haven't fully learned what we need to from the pilot process, but I'm really optimistic working with David and Joanne and Karen Dancher and the entire leadership team that we can kind of move quickly to identify a process that's streamlined, that will get us better completion rates.
Sorry, David. Do you have a question?
No, that was actually very helpful. It actually answered my questions. I was just going to make one very technical comment on this report, that the compliance plan should be under the policy number 6, that's where the violation is. Not something that you need to take this back to do that, but just for future reference.
Gotcha.
Very minor technical point.
Okay. Does Steve or Alex or Elizabeth, do you have any questions for Mike? Sorry.
I guess my question is, if part of the solution is having the principals in the classrooms observing more often, do you need more resources or more support for the principals? And do you need any of that from the board? Because, you know, hiring more subs is going to cost money.
Right.
But, you know, do you want to ask the board for that or put it in the future budget?
Right. So
Where do you think that's headed?
Right. So David has this really innovative idea about kind of growing leadership at the same time through this. I don't know, David, if you wanted to speak to that.
Well, just, I think, you know, how, as many of you know, we have had trouble, you know, with nurturing leaders, you know, within our system. And so distributed leadership is something that is in public education, there's a problem. And so how can we work more collaboratively with our teachers? Our teachers often have aspirations for, you know, continuing on, being coaches, being in different positions. How can we perhaps nurture them in different ways? And so that's part of the thinking, is around, could we have, you know, teachers, helping us and assisting us into maybe special assignment positions. Again, this would be something that would have to be talked about more thoroughly with our teachers union, but it may be an opportunity. We have many of our teachers are currently licensed as administrators, and it could be a nice opportunity for some of these periods that we're talking about, where teachers can step into those roles for a period of time to allow for some additional flexibility. And where this is particularly apparent to us right now is at the elementary level, where we have single administrators. And so sometimes the task or the opportunity or schedule to get into to do the observation is interrupted by ABC, you name it. And so those are some of the kind of the fits and starts that we struggle with. And currently, the system that we have now, and we designed it, is pretty laborious around the number of observations, the amount of write-ups. It's a lengthy process, and in some cases, we haven't been able, obviously, based on the numbers, haven't been able to get there. I mean, I also think that, we should be 100%, right? But 100% doesn't necessarily, from my perspective, equal growth, right? We want to have a system that is more informative to allow that growth mindset for all teachers. I believe that, there's good in many, but there's opportunities for growth in everyone. And opening up those opportunities more through a process that can allow that to happen is really what we're looking at. So, again, I've been in front of you many times, some of you on this board, and it doesn't feel really good to me, where I'm at right now, because I think you've heard, we've had some fits and, some starts, and we've had some different paths, and I've shared, I think, I'm feeling much, much more confident on where we are. And I think, a lot does have to do with Mike being on board too, to assist me and the administrators on making this a more, what I'm going to say, purposeful, important, most important event, right, around our work.
I'd just say that, we talked about, David says purposeful. If this is really about professional learning, and you don't get the summative evaluation results until 6 months later,
Right.
That's not really timely feedback. And so a lot of what we're looking at is how could we design it so it's useful feedback to teachers in real time. And to do that, I think we're gonna have to do a little workshopping on the design. So we're in year 2 officially, in year 2 of a pilot process right now, and so it's time to do some design work and make some decisions about streamlining it so it can get done. And then David has this great idea about special assignments. There are also, there are administrators around the state who come into districts to do like a practicum administrator session. I think part of the solution, to get back to Alex's question, could be about, release time for principals, a day a month. And so maybe we'd be spending a little bit more on subs to make sure that they're out in classrooms with teachers and having those conversations.
I just ask, and I guess it sounds to me like this might come out of the process, but is it really the information that we're getting that we're dissatisfied with, or the feedback, or the teachers dissatisfied with the types of feedback they're getting, or is it the timing of it? So I guess what I'm saying is I would hate to see us try to streamline a process if it really is giving us the information we want and the teachers are getting the information that they need from the process. I would hate to see us change it just in if it's really just a resource issue, as you're saying, because it sounds like we're taking some resource steps.
Right.
But are we feeling happy with the information that we're getting out of these reports?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
I think that at this time, we want to stay with the same framework, which is something that, again, the union has subscribed to as well. It also is what our mentor program aligns with, and coaching cycles as well. So I don't think we want to create disconnects there. So I'm referring to the Danielson framework for teaching. And so I think we want to stick with that framework, but maybe I think we can get at some of the key takeaways in these really long summative evaluations that are pretty formal. A lot of times principals are like, well, I need to take these, I need the summer to do this write-up because it's kind of long and formal and prosy. And some of the work that Holly Rowell and Lissa McDonald has been doing has been much more quick hits, bullets, and then they go towards collecting evidence of the type of learning we want for our teachers, and then compiling that evidence. So I think we can get high quality information without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, keeping the Danielson framework, but with a model that's redesigned to be more nimble, timely, and ultimately we'll make sure that we're in compliance.
Okay.
And I think there may be additional resources needed as well. Yep.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just a question on this.
Bridget, it's Elizabeth. I had a quick question. Does David have a goal of kind of to complete a certain number of additional evaluations by a date? I am concerned about about the policy, how that reads, and kind of the commitment and value. I know there's a lot of ideas and a lot of work in progress, but right now the policy is provide meaningful and timely performance evaluations, and I would include the board in, adhering to that requirement for the superintendent as well. And I think there's room for improvement there as well. But I guess I just wondered, has there been a goal set internally?
So just for the video, because sometimes it's hard to hear the phone, Elizabeth's, the core of Elizabeth's question is there sort of a defined goal of how many evaluations we would like to complete by a certain date?
That's part of what we're doing right now. And again, we are in the place where we need to evaluate the total number, because remember, there's numbers of folks that have not been evaluated in the previous cycle. So then there's additionals that are up for the current year. So one, we need to evaluate that, and I'm going to say be thoughtful about whom we put on this, and we need to be transparent about either who we aren't going to get to, or we're going to push out another year for the following reasons. So we need to be transparent about that, and then I think let you know what that number is and how we reach that number. So that would be my expectation. As far as the goals on a going forward basis, and I think you heard Mike talk a little bit about the work with HR and with Meg to support kind of a more progressive and what we'll say is frequent reminders, pushes to our administrators. And if they're saying to us that they're at, I'm just going to say November, and they haven't, what do you need? What do you need from us?
Right.
But and not let it get to, or again, as Mike said, even on those final write-ups, what do we need to do for you in May? And again, I think the other part is we really want it to be connected, closely connected, soon after the actual observation occurred, right? Because it's often, those of us who know, like I have a hard time remembering what I did a week ago in that particular lesson maybe, and how it went, right? It's kind of hard to reflect back on that particular takeaway, or even the meeting that I had, the post meeting I had. So I think it's really important that we begin to recognize and how we can connect that. But we have to do some more pushing and more diligent requirements. And again, my job on your behalf is I need to be holding the administrators accountable too.
Yeah.
And so if you're not doing that, and you haven't come to us, and we've told you to come to us, then I have to. That's a critical component of evaluation from me to them, and for the obvious reason, right? This is how we support learning, right? They're learners too. We're learners. We need to make sure that they're getting the feedback, just like students, no different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
I just
Yeah.
just wanted to thank Elizabeth for her suggestion at the last time that we had discussion on this about periodic check-ins, to not do an annual tally, but to have periodic check-ins.
Yep.
So I think the first priority is to find exactly what this retool, what this redesign is, and then, as David said, to prioritize, the ones that still aren't done for this year, and possibly do some triage, and again, be transparent about how we're deciding that, on what criteria. And then I think the final piece is the collection, compiling, and what electronic tools could we use there to send reminders, to do periodic check-ins, to have principals, instead of sending all their evaluations in at the end of the year in June, which is a very busy time, to be doing it on a continuous basis over the course of the year.
I mean, the only other thing I would say is that we have some folks that come to us, and because you see the new hire report, they come to us as what we'll say veteran. They're within a window of, they've been in the system a while. Our system, we hold ourselves accountable to do a 2-year evaluation, and again that can be also kind of internally reviewed for us and say, and again communicated back to you. Why that went from this number to this number. But in some cases, if you've been teaching and you show great competence, why do we need to then keep you on a 2-year piece? Again, the reason for that is individuals new into the profession, you know, that first year is a tough year often, and then the second year really is a way to give more, you know, formal feedback to you specifically on how things are going and what are growth opportunities. But we need to be a little bit more nimble about that too, instead of that compounding. We definitely are seeing many newer staff coming on board as a result of our current age of our faculty. So we need to address this to make sure it's doable, along with the other things that we said.
So I would ask more experienced board members, frankly, it sort of sounds like we have a plan to have a compliance plan. We're not quite sure what the compliance plan is. Where does that leave us with regard to policy governance is my question.
I was just looking at this, and the question is whether it's sufficient, if the compliance plan is acceptable at this point. And from what I'm hearing, it's actually not even quite accurate as far as what, because it essentially says we're gonna catch up by the end of 2019. And that's not necessarily the case, is what I'm hearing. So I'm just wondering if we bring this back, we don't approve it yet, bring it back maybe the first meeting in November with the fleshed out compliance plan that we can accept.
Is that reasonable timing in terms of the work that's going on, or is that?
Yeah, that would be pretty tight. Even pushing it to December would give us a better idea. I mean, we can set dates tonight, but I think it would be really important to do this retool before we do that. But
I think pushing it to December is fine as well. I think we went through this, but I would be loath to find that the compliance plan in here right now is acceptable. So I'd rather put it off until December to give you time, because there weren't any other problems in this.
Right,
In
right.
this report, so I
Right.
don't think there's a problem in pushing it off. That'd be my.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I would agree with that. What do you, Elizabeth? Did we lose you? I think we lost her. Oh, she did say she might have to drop off around 9, so
Right,
maybe
yeah,
she did
yeah.
drop off. Alex and Steve, what do you think?
I don't have a problem waiting, but I think it would be good to get some interim updates on what's going on. You know, if you're working on the plan, I don't see a problem with letting us know how it's going in the next board meeting or the next month.
Sure.
I'd rather not wait until December to hear what's going on it.
Sure.
And even if it's an informal, you know, a couple minutes from David on, you know, what you've been doing, what's going on. Any details, any information that you guys can get to us would be great. That would help my confidence that I know that the fix is being implemented.
So just a point of clarity, again, I mean, this is directed to me, right? Mike, and I'm happy to have Mike on staff, but this is directed at me. This is in my wheelhouse of responsibility, so that's fine. I obviously pretty clear, am using Mike to assist me in helping to have this to be an informed, doable process. So I hear what you're saying, and I certainly will exercise how I go about that. But it's also important, you know, that this is my responsibility. I'm not wanting you to hear that I'm dumping it on Mike or previously mentioned Meg or Karen. It's my responsibility in using the resources. So I just want to be clear. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great.
Thanks,
you
Mike.
very much, Mike, for all your help
Yeah,
tonight.
thank you.
All right, so that moves us to item number 12, Vermont School Boards Association resolutions.
Steve to weigh in. I
Yeah,
think
Steve,
last
do you
time
have
we
any
had our
comments?
discussion, and we wanted to
Okay.
give him a chance. That was it? That was it?
Honestly, there weren't a lot of comments last time. I think Martin and Elizabeth has just said as well that Martin, Elizabeth, and I were kind of, and Alex had a couple of comments on them, but I think in general we were comfortable with voting the way the subcommittee of the VSBA board had recommended voting on each of these. And we just didn't know if anyone had any further comments, because I kind of need to know if I'm going to represent the board how to vote at Lake Maury.
Yeah, As I recall, I agree
Okay.
with all the positions, yeah.
Okay. Great. That brings us to item number 13, other paper articles.
It's in your packet, the,
My two.
Steve, you and I are up.
Yep, I've got calendar pings to remind me 2 weeks before, 1 week before.
Okay. You and I can talk offline about how we divide up
Absolutely.
work on it. And I have, I think
Limited to
there are a
400
couple of
words,
previous Budget 101 articles.
500 words, okay.
So, and then the next one, we had discussed master planning and visioning because we'll be sort of in the thick of it with Dora Whittier at that stage. And then for the one due in December, Steve, you had promised us a board roles and responsibilities article. You're really heavy on the agenda for the next
Said you will
couple of months.
squeeze me for whatever you
That's
can.
right. And then we have Elizabeth talking about student outcomes, which will run in February. And then Alex, we have you down for substance abuse, which would run in March. So we wanted to just make sure that we were all clear, because I think maybe in previous meetings we haven't been clear. This seems like a pretty good schedule for the next few months, unless anyone has any other ideas to add on to potential articles further out. It feels like we have a pretty decent schedule. We just need to keep revisiting it to make sure no one forgets when it's their turn.
yeah, we generally know we put, during the budget, lead up to the budget, we actually do some additional articles that we may purchase a half page or whatever. So those generally go in there somewhere around that area. My only recommendation would be around the substance abuse. Can we call that something other than substance abuse? Can it be a little bit more clear around what it might be?
Sure. Yeah, I don't mind that at all.
The word just substance abuse is kind of, are we talking about student concerns related to substance abuse? Are we talking about, I know that you've talked a little bit about it, and we captured that, I think, quickly, but we don't have to do it now. I just would ask that for people in the audience listening, are we going to talk about that as a societal, a community, a student? Are we going to use youth risk behavior survey? Are we going to talk about, vaping and tobacco?
I did intend to have it be centered around student substance abuse, not in general society. So to answer your question about that is what I intended, and it would be along the lines of what I've been talking about at board meetings in the past month or so.
Yeah, okay.
And I also had another comment. So it's scheduled to run March 7th, which is 2 or 3 days after town meeting day. And clarify this for me, Martin. Isn't the crossover date for bills in the legislature to go from House to Senate town meeting day, or does that come before that?
Usually after that.
I don't remember.
Okay. Well, I was thinking that, March 7th is a good, just about halfway through the legislative session, and it might be worth to consider swapping places with Elizabeth. So
The challenge with that, Alex, is that student outcomes we felt was very important to run before town meeting day
Budget.
to give voters a sense of what they're paying for, basically, with the budget. And then roles and responsibilities, we sort of felt like it needed to be where it was because we need to give people time to apply and get petitions signed. Master planning and visioning, we thought we needed to give an update just because we'll be in that visioning process. That early December will have been after the community visioning session, and we might have some input from Dora Whittier at that stage about sort of where we're going and which elements of the stewardship plan cannot be taken out of the budget, even though we may end up doing something different with one of those buildings. So that's why I agree with you. I was thinking about that as we looked at it, because I thought, here's Alex again, stuck in March as opposed to early in the legislative session. I still think it's a valuable article. I think with regard to sort of pushing forward something to the legislature, I think that can be independent probably
Yeah.
of the article, I
True.
would think. And that's more of a, you working on us to sort of make some comment to the legislature or make some resolution to the legislature separately from, and this could report on it and say, this is what we as a board have done to address the problems that we see. But I'm just concerned, I don't know, everyone else speak up too. I don't mean to
So I think
be
you're
trying
right.
to.
I think you're right on with the dates that.
So, I mean, it brings up another issue as far as, it's a little bit of that's not a non sequitur. I know at the beginning of the last 2 bienniums, we have sent a letter to representatives our representatives, the 6 senators and the 4 House representatives, saying, here's what we hope you do during the upcoming session. And that can be one component of it. And I don't know if that means whether you want to still do the article or not. I guess it's very separate, but we should maybe think about doing that again, dusting off the letter that we sent last time that they didn't do anything on, and give it another shot.
I think that's worth it. Yeah, perhaps do it in December. Martin, what do you think? December?
Yeah, we would
Okay.
we would try to send it
You're
out
saying
in
you could still
December.
keep the same time on the articles,
Yeah,
but drafting something
but
specific
that's
to
right, yes.
legislators with that particular focus.
That's more useful, I think, than the article anyway. The article's gonna be read by presumably 4, I don't know how many of the senators read the other paper,
A
frankly.
couple. Yeah.
So I think that we should probably have that in our future agenda item.
I was
that
about
we
to say,
need.
is that safe to put that in future agenda
Yeah.
items, or will it get lost in the buckets of
No,
future
I don't
agenda
think
items?
I don't
Okay.
think it will.
Well, we can make note of
Okay,
it.
we can put it at the top of the list. Will that make you comfortable?
I don't want any more.
So I'm sorry, we are basically then, are we comfortable then moving on from other paper articles to item 14, setting the agenda for October 17th, because this would.
I jumped right ahead to 15, but okay.
I guess, I have a segue too, is just, because I'm trying to remember when we started talking about budgets last year, or when we started to have an eye on some of the big influencing items, because I think that might help. And Bridget, I don't know which way you wanted to go with this article, but to the extent that we could telegraph way in advance of any negative developments, just start getting that discussion going and invite people to be, if they're concerned about the possibility of a large increase in property taxes, that they need to start attending the meetings. Just last year we had, I think maybe it was December, can't remember exactly when, but we had initially a pro forma that we thought tax rates were going to go up like 5 or 6%.
Yeah, and so we
got that out there,
Right.
So I don't have any sense of what the pressures are this year.
We start to get some additional information. We get information in December, right?
Okay.
Our ADM, average daily membership of number of students, things are unfolding by that time. That doesn't mean we're not moving forward with the
Right.
budget process,
Right.
but we start to be able to put some of the pieces together. Obviously, I'm going to encourage some specific guidance from the board on what you're thinking about related to the budget on percent increase, right? Some of your thinking, at least, give me some brackets that you're thinking about, so I don't go and begin work and be way over here when you're wanting to be over here. So some parameters around some of that, some of the things that you've heard and some things that you'd like to maybe see happen. But for the most part, just budget guidance specific to your thoughts. And that is kind of on our work plan. We have that scheduled in there, but I'd like to see that happen a little bit sooner than we have in the past. To your point on having some of that information unfold, and you're right, last year we were kind of informed right up until late December, January, that things were really pretty difficult.
Yeah, I just seem to recall that we had I really do need to go back before I just assert, but I do think we had a pretty early bead on some of the pressures.
Yeah.
But that was.
Well, I think a lot of that was, directives that were coming out of either AOE
Okay.
or the governor's office around what to expect,
So it
and
was driving
we
the
kind of
process
planned
a little
accordingly.
earlier. Okay.
Well, and I think if you recall that the session before that one, the legislative session, that was sort of at the tail end of that session was when the governor came out and said I would like level funding. And I'm still going to press on that the following year.
Right.
So we had some big overall guidance from that direction about what we might be facing in terms of yield and those other things. Even though we didn't have a hard number, we had a sense of which direction
And that's
it might
kind of the way
go.
we
Yeah.
Yeah, that
budgeted.
was a big part of it.
Okay.
All right. So, agenda for October 17th, which is our next regular meeting.
So I am not at that meeting.
Okay.
So one of the things you need to know, for the state of Vermont, I represent them as their commissioner for the Vermont Military Compact. So
Yep.
every state has a compact commissioner.
Uh-huh.
So I'm the Vermont commissioner. So there's 2 days that I'm away.
Okay.
Happens to be these 17th is one of them. So I would encourage this meeting to stay on. I will either have Joanne Godak likely will step in and will be
She'll make
here.
the superintendent's report.
That's right, and she'll
sort
do that work. So
Okay.
I may amend the agenda a little bit, but I think for the most part, it looks fine. And she will be able to pick up the pieces, where we are at. Amity and Gary will be working on the item 10, which is the 2.5 financial planning and budgeting.
And
So-
they will go ahead and present that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just an FYI to all of you around that particular date.
Okay. On negotiations, I think there should be a broader just negotiations agenda item, because as we have discussed previously, all three contracts are really going to have to start. We're going to have to start to make movement on all three. So it's going to be broader than just teachers.
So I just want to say update on negotiations.
Update on negotiations. Yep. One question I had, David, was back when we were talking about other paper articles a little while back, we had talked about me doing a student outcomes article, and we had put that off for a while because of when we thought we would get some reporting on testing from last year. And my recollection was that we were supposed to see that sometime in September, so I was just wondering where we are in that, and whether it doesn't have to be at this meeting, but at some upcoming meeting soon, we start to hear a little bit about student outcomes and what we're thinking about them.
Yeah, so again, that was, Elizabeth is on for the student outcome piece on the other paper.
Well, on the other paper, but I'm
But
saying
you're just talking in
regardless of the
general
other
getting
paper, in
feedback.
general, my understanding was that we were supposed to start seeing some of the analysis and some of the reporting. I think that where that falls, the other paper article just falls because the others needed where they stacked up in terms of budget and roles and responsibilities. I think it was less connected to when we, as a board, were hoping to sort of hear about it if
So
we
let-
could.
Yeah,
Because
so,
it would just be nice going into budget season to sort of know where we are. I know it's only one data point, but it's a
Yeah,
data point
no,
that would
it's
be
fine.
nice
Yeah,
to
we-
sort of have in mind.
yeah, so let me just, let's, so note that, let me figure out a way, communicate back with you the next meeting around
Okay.
the student outcomes, when we can schedule
we
that,
can
right?
schedule
I don't want to say we'll bring it next time. Let me look at when we have a plan, because we have had the conversation, Mike with me, around when that would occur.
Okay.
And again, we have some ends monitoring work that's
Yeah.
scheduled. I don't have the calendar in front of me.
Yeah.
I think it may be December
Okay.
that we had that. I'm not quite sure. I didn't bring my my copy with me, but let me bring it back next time and
Okay.
update you on that.
All right. Are there any future agenda items that we want to move up? guess I was looking right to tools for transparency, which in my mind it really is this sort of revamp of the budget book and how we communicate about finances and budgeting. I know that wasn't the only transparency we're looking for, but that was one of the big components. And you are not at this October meeting, but was the ball back in your court then to come back with another update on where we are with the outline or the sort of?
That's right. Yeah, there's been
budget
feedback
book.
that's been shared. We're working on a mock
Yep.
piece, and then we're gonna start to populate it with information,
So
that
should we
will-
just leave that in future agenda items then, and it would get
Yep.
scheduled for the November?
keep it-
Yeah, the
yep.
November meeting, the
Mhm.
first one in November. Yes.
At the bottom of it, we have teacher evaluation system update. And given that we've been talking
you
about getting caught up on that, should we have this here? Because it seems like your work, David, you're working on a
I
more.
keep it there. I mean, it's up to you. These are other things. I think it, right. I want to get back, I just haven't had the time to do it. With the items that are identified as future agenda items, there was a period of time when, if you go back and look at
Yeah.
some agendas, I started to put the monitoring reports in which they'll be seen.
Mm-hmm.
So we kept, the plan, what I was doing before was I kept them on there.
Yep.
I told you if they were gonna be coming up in a monitoring report and when that was going to be.
Yeah.
So we didn't lose track. And then when we actually heard it in the monitoring report, we took it off.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of those necessarily fall under the policy governance or
Mhm.
a monitoring.
Yeah.
And that's for a deeper conversation around, do you still want that? As it still exists as a
Yeah.
question, yeah. So.
Okay.
I just keep it on there. It's a reminder.
So we've sort of transitioned into, are there any other future agenda items that we need to add to the future agenda items? So I think unless anyone has any other comments on the October 17th, it
right.
sounds like we have an agenda, a somewhat lighter than usual agenda, which is not a bad thing without David here. So, great. So any other future agenda items? Going once, going twice, okay. Then we're on to item 16, consider the minutes of the meetings of September 24th, September 26th, and September 30th. Yeah, there's a slight typo in the 26th, third-party administrator under comments from the public, but it's a tiny thing. I don't think it needs to come down. Yeah, I had nothing else on these that I had read them earlier today. Does anyone else have any comments on the meetings of September 30, 26 and 24? Okay, seeing no comments, they're accepted. Accounts payable order number 12. Any comments on the accounts payable order?
I should have noticed this probably at some point over the last year and a half, but what happens when there's a blank check? That's probably a Gary question. I noticed there are like 5 blank checks in the run, and it just, do you destroy the check stock? Do you do,
I believe that's to be true, but
Okay.
if you would like, we
I'll
can.
try to remember that question for next time. Because I don't think it's unusual. I'm sure that's happened before. I just wanted to know if there's a policy for the checks that get printed out as zeros.
Okay, do I have a
I'll move to
motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.